Thanks again for returning. This is Susan Shannon from Buddhist Prison Ministry, and this is the concluding episode of our 5-part mini-series on So You Want to Work with the Incarcerated. This little episode is on the importance of doing your work when you're working with the incarcerated, especially, but I think in general, just doing our work. That's what we're being called to do right now. So what do I mean about doing your work? I was at a retreat once for a program that I loved in the prison that I was in this retreat with all the other volunteers, and I mentioned the importance of doing your work. And this one man who had recently volunteered, who was just infatuated with going into the prison and seeing everybody do their own work, right? And he said, "What do you mean? I don't even know what you mean doing my own work. I'm just going in, enjoying watching everybody do their thing, and it's so energizing." And I thought, well, wow, okay, so what does that mean? They're surrogates for your enjoyment, and yeah, it just was icky, and it didn't seem like the right it was wrong. I'll just say it was wrong. And so what do I mean by doing your own work? Well, okay. As we walk around as sort of free people, people of certain privilege, that a lot of others don't have, it's easy to fall away from the drive of spiritual transformation. And it's easy to not prioritize what I like to call what's in our workbooks, the three fingers pointing back. Like when we are triggered or activated, what are the three fingers pointing back at me? It's easy for us to not prioritize um, what our own work really means. And so, for the sake of this little mini episode, um, I'm focusing on our own work, meaning what is in our lifetime that will aid in our spiritual transformation. Likely being called to doing prison work or work with the incarcerated is a result of you ripening into a place of spiritual maturation where you're being called to serve. You're being called to serve, and that's a beautiful thing. The assumption would be that there's a lot of life experience behind you and that you've cultivated some skill sets and compassion and good boundaries, etc., and you're being called to serve and you're choosing to serve the incarcerated. And what a beautiful thing. When you do this work, you uh, will witness people who have hit such a rock bottom in their life that the motivation to do their own work is huge. And even through our Buddhist prison ministry, even and especially, we get the most exuberant letters that are just bounding with energy of people finding their path, finding their spiritual life, knowing that their spiritual life is theirs to claim and always has been, and that finally they see that and they've stepped on it and woohoo, it's like a slip and slide, they're going. Well, we have to continue to do our own work so that we can generate that kind of atmosphere that allows others to do their own work too. There's a beautiful quote, maybe I can find it easily, that it's a Dharma quote. It's from Geshe Darge, and I'm going to read it now. It was for a class on renunciation that I teach. Without any effort or preconceived plans, the physical, verbal, and mental faculties of a powerful awakened one spontaneously exert an enlightening influence on others, which continues without interruption and extends to everyone without partiality. Isn't that beautiful? Without partiality. So that's what we want to cultivate. But in order to do that, we have to keep our spiritual life, our spiritual practice active, not static. We have to fluff up that pillow continually and really know what it is that we're bringing to our practice today. Yesterday was yesterday. Today is today. Tomorrow's tomorrow. And where our practice starts usually is the weakest link in our day. It's maybe a continuation of the practices that you've been doing for years or months or weeks or days or whatever. But if you have a moment in your day where you cussed at somebody or, honked the horn or was impatient or something, that right there is where your work starts. That right there is where your work starts today. And it's important that we start our spiritual practice today where we are, no matter what. And if we're truly transforming, then we're not the same person we were yesterday. This is another reason why it's important to uh, recognize that in this culture, especially, there's a lot of spiritual consumerism, and that it's easy to think that, oh, well, I've already taken a teaching on the Four Noble Truths. I don't need to take that again, just as if I've already bought my coffee for the week or something. I don't need to buy it again. No, if you're doing your work, you're not the same person as you were when you first took that teaching. It's like going up in an elevator and seeing all these different viewpoints. So do your own work continually, constantly check in with yourself and ask yourself, am I mistaking seeing transformation for my own transformation? Similarly, these days, I think, especially after COVID, when the popularity of podcasts just, blew up, um, I'm sensing that some people are maybe thinking that listening to a podcast is spiritual practice. Listening to somebody else describe how they are doing their work means I'm doing my work. Maybe not. Maybe it's better than certain things a person could be doing, but we have to be clear on what is ours to do. And what is ours to do has to usually do with our hurts, our fears, our shames, our conditioning. It has to do with stuff we don't want to put on our resume or we don't want to think is in the mandala of us. And that is our work. And that is what the people that in the prison are doing when they're taking these self-help classes, these rehabilitative classes. They're doing that at the foundation. Foundations are kind of messy, right? If your foundation is cracked, then no matter what you build above it is not going to be stable. So it's important that we do our own work. It's also important that we know our blind spots. We identify our privilege. We know what we've been born into, and we know that that is different for so many people. And one way that is useful to begin to understand other realities is to, uh, well, I'll tell you what I did. I watched The Wire and The Sopranos each 9 times through. And I wanted to get to know, I wanted to understand how a person could find it normal to, for example, go to a funeral of an enemy gang member, and go there with the intent to shoot up the other homies of that gang member, and then just like go out and have a hamburger or something. I wanted to know how that could be normalized. I really did. And it was so important to me to get beyond judgment, because judgment is really hard. As you're going to be hearing things in prison work that are unbelievable. And the worst crime, I have a story called The Worst Crime. The worst crime is not anything that you might hear about a crime. It's how people were raised, how they were neglected and fell through the cracks, how society has kept people down over and over and over and over and over again. I used to tell people in a certain training, especially white people who wanted to work in a prison, you know, experience what it's like to be an other if you haven't before. I know I'm kind of hopefully maybe speaking to the choir here, as they say, but what I used to suggest is things, and nobody did it, like locate a community center in your area, like a Cambodian community center, or Laotian, or whatever, a community center from a different culture, and go there and go to an event and feel what it feels like to not be the dominant. Uh, Go to a restaurant um, or a barbecue or something that, restaurant that normally doesn't have people in there that look like you, and just go in there and feel it, feel it, feel it, feel it, and know that that's not even a whiff of what a lot of people have lived with their whole life since they popped out of their mama. So it's really important. And finally, really educate yourself on prison culture. Uh, When before I got into prison work, I took a prison ministry class, and our syllabus was amazing. It was criminology, it was prison culture, it was history it was history of um, what do they call it? Not discipline theory, but something like that. Anyway, it was history of the penitentiaries. It was stories from inmates. There's some wonderful archival resources now for prison writings, and really immerse yourself in the kind of stories that come from lives of people who have lived lives that you will not be able to even imagine existed. So step out of your privilege, your culture a little bit, become aware of the realities of other people. Um, Finally, be honest with your capacity, because this can be really hard work. When I started my prison work, my mentor continued to want me to get involved with this and that and the other program. And I made a promise to myself I would not increase my time in the prison at all until I could sleep without the inner narratives going on through my head and my heart, without curling up into fetal position and weeping at some of the stories. I needed to be able to integrate moment by moment by moment. And eventually I did, and I ended up getting very entrenched in prison work, facilitating multiple programs for years, and being the death row chaplain on death row and with the main line, along with starting a lot of programs and things like that. So, but it was only with that really careful discernment of my capacity did I increase my time. So be aware of the signs of burnout, and that you might need to bolster your spiritual protection. Know that if you find yourself burnt out, like you don't want to go in, or you're tired of hearing things that you're hearing, or it's affecting your outer life, um, be gracious with yourself and maybe take a break. It's important to take a break if you need to. It really is. Another thing that was drilled into my mind in the beginning of my time in going into the prisons was that inmates are used to people coming and going. They're used to impermanence. They're used to things being promised and promises not being kept. And so Father George, my mentor, he would not let anybody become a volunteer unless they could commit to at least a year. For that very reason, he wanted people to know who they could depend on, and and he chose the right people of his volunteers. He really did. So you want to be careful. Don't just jump in head first. Little by little by little, test your capacity and take good care. Your self-care is so important in going into a prison. It's also really hard to eat in a prison. You need to be sure that you're nourished ahead of time and that you know for sure what kinds of nourishment you can bring in, if any, and what kind of container, etc. You need to know so much about how to stay bolstered in the prison work. So find all that out, do your best. If if you've enjoyed these little videos, let us know because I'd love to offer a more broad, in-depth series on teaching Dharma in prisons if there's enough people interested. So you can write to us, you can email us, you can Instagram us, you can Facebook like us, whatever. But thank you so much, and hope to hear from you sometime. Thanks.